Just days ago, Pope Leo XIV stood inside the Sagrada Familia and blessed it in front of the King and Queen of Spain. He was only the second pope in history to celebrate Mass there. The first was Benedict XVI, back in 2010. 600 singers performed. Fireworks lit up Barcelona. Thousands of people watched from the streets on giant screens. Every headline called it the same thing: complete. The world's most famous unfinished building, 144 years in the making, was finally done. But here's the question worth asking. Is it? The honest answer is yes and no. Let's start with the yes. On February 20th, 2026, workers installed the final arm of the cross on the Tower of Jesus Christ. The structure reached 172.5 meters, taller than St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, taller than any church ever built. The papal blessing came on June 10th, exactly 100 years after Gaudi died. That symmetry was not a coincidence. The Sagrada Familia Foundation planned for that moment for decades. And it's real. The central tower, the one Gaudi always intended to be the highest point, the one representing Christ above all others, is structurally done. Some of the workers who completed it had grandparents who worked on the same building. That is what 144 years looks like in human terms. The world's tallest church is finished. That part is true. Now for the no. The interior of that same tower is still under construction. Work continues through 2027 and 2028. And the Tower of Jesus Christ is just one piece. Gaudi designed 3 grand facades. The Nativity facade faces east, the Passion facade faces west, and the Glory facade facing south, the one Gaudi considered the main entrance, is the most important of the 3. Construction on its vertical walls only began in June 2025. 3 artists have submitted proposals for its sculptural program, but the board has not made a final selection yet and has set no deadline to do so. Full completion is estimated around 2034. So the main entrance of the world's tallest church doesn't exist yet. Visitors entering this week are using a side entrance. The front door Gaudi designed, the one he considered the most important part of the building, is still years away, and finishing it will start a fight. To build the Glory facade as Gaudi designed it, a grand staircase needs to connect the entrance down to street level, 60 meters long. The problem? Residential buildings now occupy that space. Completing the staircase means demolishing those buildings and relocating approximately 3,000 residents and businesses. The estimated cost? Between 150 and 200 million euros. The Sagrada Familia Foundation says it will cover those costs. In 2019, the church quietly bought an empty plot of land a block away, widely seen as preparation for relocating displaced residents. But no legally binding agreement with Barcelona City Council has been signed. Residents have filed lawsuits. Some argue the staircase was never part of Gaudi's original vision. The foundation says the surviving drawings show it clearly. Both sides are arguing about an interpretation of plans that were burned in 1936. The dispute is unresolved. It will likely end up in court. Full completion is now estimated between 2034 and 2035. And here's one more layer. Even the parts that are already done are contested. In 2021, a 12-pointed crystal star was installed on top of the Virgin Mary Tower. It was immediately criticized, not just for how it looked, but for what it represented. Gaudi's original plans were burned by anarchists in 1936. What survived were fragments, photographs, and memory. Every decision made since then is someone's interpretation of what Gaudi intended. The crystal star is just the most visible recent example of that problem. It's not an aesthetic argument. It's a deeper decision, whether what's been built is actually his building. That question doesn't go away when the cranes come down. So, is the Sagrada Familia finally complete? One tower is done. The world's tallest church is real. The Pope blessed it this week on the 100th anniversary of Gaudi's death. That milestone is historic, and it deserves to be. But the building Gaudi actually designed, all 3 facades, the staircase, the full sculptural program, is still about a decade away. And some of what gets built in that decade will still be debated. Gaudi said his client wasn't in a hurry. If you want the full story, the engineering that took 144 years to solve, and the technology that finally made it possible, we covered everything right here.
On February the 20th, 2026, workers lifted the final arm of a 17-meter cross into the Barcelona sky. When it locked into place, the Sagrada Familia became the world's tallest church, 144 years after construction began. 144 years. That's how long this building has been under construction. Workers laid the foundation stone in 1882, before the Eiffel Tower existed, before the first skyscraper, before anyone had poured reinforced concrete. The building has survived 2 world wars, a civil war that destroyed the construction plans, a pandemic that halted work entirely, and technological revolutions that changed how humans build. So what does it take to finish a construction project that's outlasted empires? By mid-January 2026, workers had installed all 4 horizontal arms of the cross. On February 20th, they installed the upper arm, bringing the tower to its highest point. The structure is complete. The entire structure reaches 172.5 meters, taller than St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and nearly twice the height of Big Ben in London. That final height isn't arbitrary. Gaudi believed human creation shouldn't exceed God's work, so he deliberately designed the tower to stand 1 meter shorter than Montjuic Hill, Barcelona's highest natural point. The timing carries enormous significance. 2026 marks the centenary of Gaudi's death. The Sagrada Familia Foundation has planned a year of commemorative events, starting with a solemn mass on June 10th and culminating in the lighting of the Nativity facade in December. Pope Leo XIV is expected to visit during 2026. If confirmed, it would be the first papal visit since Pope Benedict XVI consecrated the basilica in November 2010. Construction began on the Glory facade's vertical walls in June 2025. Meanwhile, 3 artists are creating sculptures for the Chapel of the Assumption. Tourism funds everything. In 2024, 4.9 million visitors paid to tour the basilica, more than visited the Statue of Liberty or the Colosseum in Rome, generating 44.7 million euros for construction. About 15% of those visitors came from the United States. The story begins not with Gaudi, but with a bookseller. Josep Maria Boccabella founded the Spiritual Association of Devotees of St. Joseph in 1866. After visiting the Vatican in 1872, he returned to Barcelona determined to build a church inspired by the Basilica at Loreto. On March 19, 1882, workers laid the foundation stone in Barcelona's Eixample district. The first architect, Francisco de Paula de Villar, designed a standard neo-Gothic church. But del Villar resigned on March 18, 1883, after disagreements with the project advisors. The commission passed to a relatively unknown 31-year-old architect named Antoni Gaudi. Gaudi threw out del Villar's conventional plans entirely. He envisioned something Barcelona had never seen: a massive basilica with 18 towers representing the 12 apostles, the 4 evangelists, the Virgin Mary, and Jesus Christ at the center. His inspiration came from nature. He studied trees, bones, mountains, and shells, translating their organic forms into architecture. Columns branched like trees. Towers spiraled upward like seashells. The basilica would tell the story of Christ through 3 grand facades. The Nativity facade would celebrate birth and life. The Passion facade would depict suffering and death. The Glory facade would represent resurrection and eternal life. Gaudi knew he wouldn't live to see it finished. He often said his client wasn't in a hurry. From 1883 until 1914, Gaudi worked on multiple projects across Barcelona. But after 1914, he devoted himself exclusively to Sagrada Familia. He moved into a workshop on site, spending 16-hour days refining models and calculations. On November 30th, 1925, Gaudi witnessed the completion of the Tower of Barnabas. It was the only tower he ever saw finished. By the time of his death, less than 1/4 of the basilica was complete, but he had created detailed plaster models and calculations that would guide future architects. Gaudi's final day was June 7, 1926. While crossing Gran Via de les Corts Catalanes at Ballén Street, Gaudi stepped back to avoid an approaching tram. He didn't hear or see a second tram coming from the opposite direction. It struck him at 6:05 in the evening. The 73-year-old architect fell, hitting his head on the pavement. In his final years, Gaudi had lived austerely, wearing shabby clothes and focusing entirely on his work. Passers-by mistook him for a beggar. Taxi drivers refused to transport him. A police officer eventually took him to Hospital de la Santa Cruz. The chaplain from Sagrada Familia didn't recognize him until the next day. It was too late. Gaudi died on June 10, 1926, 15 days before his 74th birthday. Thousands of Barcelona residents lined the streets for his funeral procession. He was buried in the Chapel of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in the crypt where his remains rest today. Construction continued under Dominic Sugranes until July 20, 1936. 2 days after the Spanish Civil War began, members of the Federación Anarquista Ibérica stormed the construction site. They torched the workshop, destroyed Gaudi's models, burned drawings and photographs, and set fire to the crypt. They even smashed the lid of Gaudi's tomb. The anarchists returned with dynamite, intending to destroy the Nativity facade completely. A government representative intervened at the last moment, saving the basilica from total destruction. The loss was catastrophic. Most of Gaudi's detailed plans, models, and notes were gone. 12 people connected to the construction project were killed during the Civil War. Sugranes died in 1938 at age 59. After the war ended in 1939, architect Francesc de Paula Quintana took over. He spent a decade reconstructing what he could from surviving fragments, published photographs, and memory. Workers gathered thousands of pieces of smashed plaster models, trying to reassemble them like puzzles. Then came another setback. On April 19, 2011, an arsonist set fire to the sacristy, forcing the evacuation of 1,500 tourists. The fire burned for 45 minutes. A 65-year-old man with mental health issues was arrested at the scene. COVID-19 brought construction to a halt on March 11, 2020. For nearly 4 months, work stopped completely. The basilica reopened on July 4, 2020, but the pandemic's economic impact had severely reduced visitor numbers and funding. Here's the core problem. Sagrada Familia has 36 interior columns supporting the roof, each one unique, none straight. For comparison, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris has just 10 primary columns. Each column starts as a geometric shape at the base, hexagon, octagon, or 12-sided. As it rises, it twists and transforms. A hexagonal column at the ground level becomes an octagon at mid-height and splits into branches near the ceiling. The twist rate varies. Some columns rotate 15 degrees over their height, some 30. These aren't decorative choices. Gaudi calculated load distribution through branching. One column at the crossing supports the tower weight above, approximately 6,000 tons. Instead of channeling that force straight down through a single massive pillar, the column branches into 4 smaller supports. Each branch carries a fraction of the load, spreading stress across the foundation. The geometry is hyperbolic paraboloid, the same shape you'd get if you twisted a square piece of paper while pulling opposite corners. The stone surface curves in 2 directions simultaneously. There are no flat faces to measure from, no right angles to reference. When the Civil War destroyed Gaudi's models in 1936, architects lost the exact specifications for how each column should transform as it rises. Photographs showed the overall shapes. Surviving plaster fragments gave clues, but the precise twist rates, branch angles and connection points were gone. Francesc de Paula Quintana spent 10 years after the war reconstructing what he could. Workers gathered thousands of pieces of smashed models, matching edges like jigsaw puzzles. But gaps remained, entire columns with only partial data. The breakthrough came in the 1980s when Mark Burry introduced software designed for airplane wing analysis. The software could input the incomplete data from Gaudi's fragments, calculate the missing geometries, and verify whether the reconstructed shapes would actually hold the basilica's weight. But verifying the math didn't solve the construction problem. Each column requires between 800 and 1200 individual stone blocks, more pieces than a typical family home has brick, carved to fit together with millimeter precision. The blocks must account for the column's twist, the surface curvature in two directions, and the exact angle where branches split. Human stone carvers working with traditional tools would need months per column, and even then, errors accumulate. That's why Dutch engineers built a CNC milling machine specifically for this project. The machine receives the digital column geometry from Burry's calculations. Then it cuts stone initially using a 4-axis, now 7-axis robotic arm, meaning it can rotate and tilt the cutting bit in multiple directions simultaneously while moving across the stone surface. The cutting precision is 0.1 millimeters. For comparison, human error with hand tools typically falls within 2 to 3 millimeters. When you're stacking 1,200 blocks over a 20-meter column, those errors compound. A column off by 3 millimeters at the base will be off by half a meter at the ceiling. The branches won't align, the vault won't connect. The machine eliminates that error. It can cut a stone block's complex curved surface in 6 hours, work that would take a master carver 3 weeks. More importantly, the 1,200th block fits exactly as precisely as the first. This is why completion is possible now when it wasn't before. The combination of aeronautical stress analysis software and 5-axis CNC stone cutting solved both the design verification problem and the construction precision problem. Gaudi's vision required 21st century technology to execute. Not everyone celebrates the approaching completion. The Glory facade will include a grand staircase descending from the main entrance. The original 1905 urban plan designated space for this staircase, but over the decades the city built up around the basilica. Residential buildings now occupy that space. Completing the staircase as designed requires demolishing buildings that house approximately 1,000 families, affecting around 3,000 people, equivalent to displacing an entire Barcelona neighborhood the size of Gracia's Gothic Quarter. Residents filed lawsuits claiming the staircase wasn't in Gaudi's original plans. They argue the construction board is inventing justifications to expand the basilica's footprint. The Sagrada Familia Foundation insists the staircase is essential. Gaudi's surviving drawings show it clearly. The foundation argues that completing his vision requires temporary displacement, with affected families receiving compensation and relocation assistance. In February 2025, Chief Architect Jordi Fowley announced they would proceed despite protests. Some architecture critics argue that continuing construction betrays Gaudi's memory. They claim modern architects can't truly interpret his fragmentary plans. Others counter that leaving it unfinished would betray Gaudi's vision. The architect left detailed geometries and structural principles, enough for successors to work from. Leaving it unfinished would be the real betrayal. The basilica operates as an expiatory temple, meaning it can't accept government money or bank loans. It relies entirely on private donations and ticket sales. The neighborhood around Sagrada Familia struggles with over-tourism. Local shops have been replaced by souvenir stores. Residents complain about noise, crowds, and rising housing costs driven by short-term vacation rentals. After 144 years of construction, the question isn't just when it will finish, it's why now. For decades, completion seemed impossible, but modern technology solved what human hands couldn't. CNC machines cutting complex stone, software verifying destroyed plans, and tourism funding generating millions annually. These 3 breakthroughs made completion finally achievable. Here's what completion actually means. There are 3 finish lines. 2026 marks the symbolic completion, The Tower of Jesus Christ, the central spire that represents Gaudi's entire vision, will be blessed and finished. This is the tower that makes Sagrada Familia the world's tallest church. It's the element Gaudi himself designed to stand at the peak, representing Christ ascending to heaven. When this tower is complete, Gaudi's spiritual and architectural vision is realized. 2033 marks the structural completion. All 18 towers will be built. The glory facade walls will stand. The main vaults and roofs will be in place. This is when the last major stone is laid, 151 years after construction began. The building's skeleton will be finished. And 2035 marks the decorative completion. The glory facade sculptures, interior details, and final ornamental work will be carved. This is when craftspeople set down their tools for the last time. After the tower opens in 2026, the viewing platform inside the cross will become accessible to visitors, probably in 2027. Visitors will climb to 172 meters and look across Barcelona from the world's tallest church. Architects, sculptors, and craftspeople have dedicated entire careers to this building. Some will retire having worked their whole lives on a structure their great-grandparents also helped build. When the last stone is placed, Sagrada Familia will transform from a construction site into a completed monument. The cranes will come down, the scaffolding will disappear. That moment will reveal whether modern architects truly captured Gaudi's vision. It will show whether a century of different hands could create something unified, and it will demonstrate whether a 19th century architect's dream can still inspire the 21st century. Here's something to think about. In 2033, 151 years after Gaudi handed his first sketches to stone carvers, the last piece will be placed. Not by him, not by anyone who knew him. Now, those future generations are nearly done. Was Gaudi's vision worth the century-and-a-half wait? When you look at those towers reaching toward the sky, covered in light-catching glass and ceramic, do you think he'd be satisfied with what we've built in his name? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more Megabuild stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.